Today, Alaska operates as a massive industrial machine. This sprawling wilderness now drives global energy markets through a sophisticated network of extraction. Underneath that ice sits immense wealth. We're talking about billions of barrels of crude oil and literal mountains of gold, all being pulled to the surface by drilling rigs that dwarf the frozen landscape. But all of this originally belonged to the Russian Empire. In 1867, they chose to voluntarily hand this exact piece of land over to a rapidly expanding United States. They didn't sell it for billions either. The entire territory went for $7 million. When you break that down, the U.S. acquired Alaska for roughly 2 cents an acre. That incredible gap in valuation makes this transaction the most lucrative windfall the United States ever secured, and a painfully humiliating miscalculation for Russia. To understand why Tsar Alexander II would authorize such a deal, you have to look at the world through his eyes in 1867. The Russian Empire was already gigantic. It stretched across thousands of miles of harsh, unlivable frozen territory. They had no shortage of snow and ice. In the mid-19th century, a territory's worth was measured almost entirely by its surface utility. If you couldn't grow crops, build cities on it, or easily transport goods, the land held very little value. When the Russian government evaluated Alaska using that metric, they didn't see an asset. They saw a useless, freezing block of ice that cost money to defend but offered no strategic or economic return. Because their valuation model relied solely on the surface, they were completely blind to the natural resources beneath their feet. Alaska was simply dead weight, and they wanted it off their books. The Tsar approached the United States with a remarkably casual attitude, simply looking to see what they might pay to take the land off his hands. The resulting international negotiations didn't take months. The two nations hammered out the details of the transfer in a frantic overnight sprint. Americans initially figured they could secure the territory for $5 million, but quickly agreed to a final price of $7,200,000. The paperwork was finalized at a blistering pace, and the payment was rapidly authorized. It happened so fast that the Russian representative woke up the next morning regretting his haste. He realized that if he had just held out a little longer, he easily could have squeezed more money out of the Americans. In their desperation to drop a perceived burden, the Russian Empire executed an overnight fire sale without conducting a single survey of what might actually be buried under all that snow. So, how did the American public react to adding over 500,000 square miles of new territory for such a cheap price? They hated it. The citizens were absolutely furious with the politicians who brokered the deal. The purchase became a national punchline. People loudly complained that the government had wasted $7 million taxpayer dollars on a giant, completely useless block of ice. This intense backlash showed that both the Russian sellers and the angry American public were judging the land by the exact same criteria: its unlivable surface. That perspective held for about 20 years. Then, in 1896, the region was suddenly swarmed by thousands of desperate prospectors hiking into the mountains. The catalyst was a massive strike. Explorers had found unthinkable quantities of gold hidden right underneath the ice. Shortly after that, massive subterranean oil reserves were discovered, proving the frozen territory was actually a highly lucrative energy empire. This graph shows how that valuation shifted over time. The line for surface livability stays flat and low across the late 19th century, while the line for subsurface resource value suddenly spikes exponentially right around 1896. The metric for evaluating a territory's worth had flipped. It no longer mattered if the surface was harsh and unlivable, as long as you could extract billions in raw wealth from underneath it. Back in the United States, public opinion reversed. The heavily mocked politicians of 1867 were suddenly hailed as geopolitical geniuses who had secured the deal of the century. Across the ocean, the reality hit the Russian Empire hard. They had practically given away a sprawling empire of gold and oil. The physical borders of their map hadn't changed, but the land itself had cracked open to reveal a fortune they never bothered to look for. Even today, that realization lingers. For modern Russian officials, looking at the Alaskan border remains an incredibly painful national memory. The sale of Alaska stands as a colossal blunder because the Russian Empire failed to anticipate a modern economy built on subsurface extraction. By ignoring what lay beneath the ice, they surrendered an economic empire